Hello, everyone that's logging on for today's webinar that I know is the most exciting topic of your week, which is going to be all about HR and mistakes that people are making. I swear it's pretty lighthearted too. I'm not going to make this too serious and point out everything that you do wrong. But I'm going to give a couple more seconds for people to log on in the next minute. But while you're joining, feel free to put any questions in the little chat box while I'm talking today. I don't know about you, but if I have a question and I don't ask it right away, I will completely forget it. So feel free to type while you're sitting in the session today, and I'll make sure to answer them at the end of our session. And if I don't know the answer, I'll make sure to ask someone that does know how to answer your question. So I'm going to give a few more seconds for people to log on. Okay, it's 3 o'clock. At least I am in Atlanta, Georgia. So it's 3 o'clock here, and I'm hoping it's lunchtime wherever you are on the West Coast. So I'm going to get started today because I really do value your time, and I want to get through this. That way you can ask me anything and get back to enjoying your Thursday, or as I like to call it, Friday Eve, because I celebrate Fridays for a really long time. So today, I wanted to have a session about the common HR mistakes that we typically see every day. Obviously, not our clients are making these, but the mistakes that we see that a lot of our interested audience wants to know about. And then the HR mistakes that we see specifically, because we're HR for health, what we see dental practices and healthcare practices making. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Taylor Danko, and I'm the product marketing manager here at HR for Health. And that title means that I focus on obviously marketing, but the really fun part about product marketing means that it's my goal and like part of my job is to understand our products that we sell. And I want to understand, how do I explain it to our users, or how do I explain it to clients? How do I explain it to people on the internet in a way that makes sense? Because HR software is probably not everyone's vocabulary. It shouldn't be. I don't want the average person to know everything about HR and HR softwares, but that's where I come in. And so I work with our team that helps build out our HR software, and work with them on whether we're improving features, whether we're launching new features. And I find ways to communicate that to the general public in a way that makes sense. And so I help out with some other things even outside of that. So sometimes most of our social media, our email marketing campaigns. Sorry that I am in your inbox a lot, but it is me that is sending a lot of those. And I do have two cats as well, that are currently taking their midday naps. They probably won't be bothering anyone anytime soon. But I have to work so I can pay their rent. So here we are today. And first of all, though, why are these mistakes so common? Like, why are they happening even to begin with? I'm going to pull this a little bit so I have my notes with me. Um, why are these mistakes even happening? And why are they so common? Specifically with HR for Health. And so I'm going to speak to more so on dental practices, healthcare practices in that general area, in that general audience. And the reason why they're happening a lot is because HR is not taught in school. When you're looking to get your medical degree, they're not thinking to put HR or business in those classes. And on top of this, even if those were classes that were taught as like part of your core competencies, those laws and employment laws in general are changing constantly. So it's almost impossible to keep up with them, even if you had learned a lot of this in school. Employment laws on a federal level, so across the United States, and then on a state level, those are changing. It could be upwards of multiple times each year. So with the laws changing, it makes these mistakes more common because you could adapt to one and then something else is going to come up and you're not able to adjust, or you have to make changes to your policies, whatever it might be. we see these mistakes happening a lot because it's difficult to keep up with all of them. And then there are some nuances when it comes to the healthcare and dental practice industries. And so, what I see as someone in marketing, I look online a lot of the times and I'm seeing that healthcare and dental practices, whether that be the office manager or the dental practice owner, they're looking to Google specific questions, whether that be related to overtime or timekeeping practices. But the issue that you can run into is it's specific towards that industry. And so a lot of the answers that you're receiving on Google cater more towards big corporate organizations, and it's run a lot differently, and they have different needs than you do as a healthcare or dental practice owner. So with that, I kind of wanted to start there just to say, like, it's not okay, obviously, to be making these mistakes, but I don't want you to feel like you're the only person that's making them or that you should know better. Like, you should not. You should not know all of these things. That's not what you went to school for. And that wasn't what you had intended to go to school for either. So these mistakes are really common. Doesn't mean that they're legal. And so I don't want you to feel alone in making those mistakes or feeling bad about making those mistakes. But the first one that we see pretty frequently, and I do see in a lot of the discussion forums within the dental community, is having outdated policies and employee handbooks. And so within those mistakes, so the way that I've laid out this presentation today is I'm going to tell you what the common mistake is and what I typically see, and then I'll give you a solution on the other side, because that would be super boring if I just told you how you're messing up all day. So with employee handbooks, what we'll see is typically they're not updated regularly. So that could be from a compliance standpoint, like a law changes and you need to update your handbook, or maybe you just wanted to change something at your practice. What if you didn't have a policy on no smoking within the parking lot? Or maybe something crazy happened at the office and you want to start to enforce you can't date your coworker. That's going to change. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's on a federal or state employment law level. But those policies can evolve and change over time as you grow as a business or as you just change culturally. And like societally, things are going to start changing. And you have to adapt and adjust your policies as needed. I also see that people are borrowing handbooks. So it doesn't mean like a literal physical copy, but let's say you meet with another practice owner and you look over the handbook that they're using and you're like, oh, I want to use that for my practice. It's going to be different on a federal and state level. And then sometimes, what if you're taking a template and you start, maybe you don't even follow what's going on in the template that you're picking. So a lot of times we're seeing that these templates that are being pulled from online and implemented, while it's a good idea, it's better. You had the thought, you wanted the employee handbook, but sometimes you're not even acting in line with those policies either. So the solution to that is having a handbook that's specifically built for your team. And so the best way to do this, and I swear this isn't a sales pitch the whole time, whatever platform that you really want to work with. HR for Health is great because we specialize in healthcare and dental, but across the board, just to make your life easier, have a handbook within a system that auto updates on its own. It's one less thing that you have to worry about. And it's not just like the building of the handbook itself. It comes with having to make sure that everyone has read that handbook. And so the only way to prove that is by signing it. But the best way to sign that is through some e-signatures. So it's something similar for me in the way that I think about it. In college, and all of us, we had syllabus that we had to read in that first week of school. I think I had a professor that was super fed up with all of our behavior. And so he made us sign the syllabus and turn it back in. And so from the professor standpoint, right, and make sure like I've told all of my students what the requirements are, what's expected of them, and that they should know and understand this. But that professor wanted us to read it and acknowledge it, to say, we read this, and so we can't come to you later and say, I didn't know about this deadline that was coming up. Now that professor is protected. But for me as a student or even as an employee, I personally love having, like in college, I loved having the syllabus on hand because I could look back at any time and see what points were given for whatever assignment that might be. But as an employee, I love having access to my employee handbook because let's say I want to go on vacation. Let's say I want to use sick leave. Let's say I'm not having children anytime soon. However, what if I want to know about pregnancy leave? And I want to see what the policies are around it so I can plan my life better. I love being able to have direct access to that employee handbook. And then it also just makes more sense. If I want to start looking at those sick leave policies, I want something that's up to date and I want to be able to use the right handbook for the scenario that I'm given in the moment. So having a clear employee handbook tailored to your practice for one, two, just having something that updates on its own is so much easier. And then three, having something that's electronic and something that's digital that you can sign and that it stores it all for you and it's time stamped so you can prove if that were to ever come up. My employee signed it and this is when they did it. Same thing as a student, I signed the syllabus and I acknowledged it. So if I come back and say I didn't know, can't really say that. I acknowledged it and put that in writing. And then as an employee, I love having that on hand. And it's great for you to have on hand too. So you're not repeating yourself all the time. You can say, look it up in the employee handbook. We wrote out the policies for our sick leave and PTO, all of that good stuff. It's in there for you to look over at your own discretion. The next mistake that we see a lot is poor onboarding and offboarding practices. So just winging it, you can do that in probably a lot of other areas in your life. Just don't do it with HR. When it comes to onboarding, it's something that's often overlooked. I would imagine if I were in your shoes that dealing with the shortage of healthcare and dental workers right now is incredibly frustrating. And so when you find someone, you just want them to get started. You just want them to get into the practice and to start to work. But the problem with onboarding is that it is the very first impression that someone has of your practice. So you want to make sure that you're getting started on the right foot. But what we're seeing is that a lot of new hires are just thrown in without the proper training or the required training that they need, the critical forms that they need. So that, again, I'm going to say federal and state level. Don't make that into a drinking game or else it won't end well for anyone. But there is two different levels that you have to be aware of. It's not just federal, it's also going to be on your state level as well. And so if they're not signing those, we often see that it's really not in a clear checklist either. So let's say best case scenario, we'll see them have some of the forms, but it's unclear as to when and how and why they're needing to sign those forms or turn them in. And then offboarding is completely forgotten about up until, the employee is coming back for their final paycheck. So the solution to that is have just a checklist. Have a checklist of all of the federal and state level new hire forms that you need to have them sign and turn back into you. Same thing with the employee handbook. They should be signing that digitally and it should be time stamped and it should be sent back into you. And that's them telling you, I understand the rules of your practice and I'm willing to abide by them. For offboarding reminders, you want to have some things in place for you to remember how to submit their final pay, anything with benefits and access removal. That's something that's forgotten about pretty frequently is you want to make sure that whatever systems they had access to, that you're making sure to remove their accounts. You're making sure to bring back in any keys that they might have to the facility just to keep you and the rest of your employees safe. And so having all of this done and in a checklist and making sure that you're doing the same thing for every employee is really, really important and it'll protect you in the long run. So with onboarding and hiring, which those are two different things. So with this particular mistake with hiring, we see that there's a lot of inconsistencies. And so first, I do want to make a note that onboarding and hiring, to me, I don't know why they sound kind of similar in my head, but onboarding is that process of when someone is getting started at a new job. So you're bringing them on board to your team. Hiring, though, is that phase that's right before that. So that includes your interviewing, that includes any working interviews, that includes recruiting. And so looking into applicants and reviewing their resumes and cover letters and anything that they're submitting. And so what we see a lot of the time is there's a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to hiring for different positions. As a good rule of thumb is what you do for one employee, do it across the board, no matter what. Because if you don't, that can lead to a lot of legal risks. So if you're asking different questions, you're giving different information. Same thing even with pay transparency, being the same across the board for all positions, for all people, keeping it very, very consistent is the best way to keep yourself safe when you're going through this hiring process. And there should be the same thing when it comes to HR documentation. Having that be very clear and having a process for that across the board will keep you a lot safer in the long run. And so the magic equation, just be as clear as possible. Don't assume that anyone knows what you're thinking or that they should know all the information already. Be really clear in your expectations when you write out that job description, when you post it online. And you'll have better hires in the long run too. So the more that you tell an employee up front, the more that you tell an applicant up front, and the more transparent that you are, you'll be able to weed out those candidates that aren't a good fit for your practice. So you can do this by having structured interview questions ahead of time. So making sure we also have a guide on this that I'll send out after, where there's interview questions that you can and can't ask. So making sure the best thing to do is just put it in front of you. I don't remember all the questions that I want to ask someone when I'm interviewing. So making sure you have it in front of you, try not to stray from it. So that way you don't ask anything that you're not supposed to be asking. And make sure if you're not the one doing the hiring, train your managers to understand the process and what they can and can't ask. And then the last thing is to always put that offer letter in writing. It sets clear expectations to the employee, it sets clear expectations to the other colleagues and for the standard across the practice, to make sure that they know what's going to happen next and what's expected of them. Mistake number 4, misclassifying employees. So that is one of the easiest and quickest mistakes to make, is when you are misclassifying them, whether that be exempt versus non-exempt. That can lead to overtime violations. And this is something that confuses absolutely everyone. Misclassification means that you're labeling someone as a contractor, so 1099, when legally they should be an employee, a W-2. The IRS and the Department of Labor, they care a lot about this on a federal level. And then on a state level, that also matters a lot too. And so the same goes for exempt versus non-exempt. And that goes into who's getting overtime. So if you label someone as exempt when they're actually not, you can owe them a ton of back pay. And it's one of those things that's absolutely not worth it to mess with or to guess on. I wouldn't recommend winging it when you're classifying your employees. And that's where I think it's really cool, specifically with HR for Health, is that it's different when you're working in the dental and healthcare industry. Sometimes there's nuances. Sometimes this isn't a Googleable answer, right? Maybe your employee is doing something different. Maybe there's a new position. Maybe something's shifting within your practice. And it's so much better to have a company that understands exactly what you're going through and what kind of positions you have, what kind of employees you have. So that way you're not stuck with any legal issues down the road. So if you're navigating these awful waters by yourself when you're trying to classify your employees, make sure that you are properly classifying them. This includes their pay, taxes, and benefits need to be handled correctly. Review those roles regularly to make sure that they're still in line with that classification. And if someone works set hours, reports to you, and only works for you, they're probably not a 1099. Regardless of what you see online or what you ask in Google, now you have ChatGPT. So whatever you're asking AI, best practice is to ask an HR professional or an employment law attorney, and someone that can really help you understand how to classify them. And luckily, that's one of those things where sure, you'll have to come back later on and maybe review it if you need to with their job descriptions, but just get it over with in the beginning so that way you have it done and it's handled. And when you're running payroll with whoever your provider is, it's a lot easier in the long run and it's something that you don't have to think about. HR mistake number 5 that I see pretty frequently. And this one's kind of interesting to me, and I didn't know a lot of these things beforehand. So, mishandling employee records. So, within HR, there are ways and best practices when it comes to handling employee records. That can vary on a lot of different ways, and I'll explain in a second. But some of the mistakes that we see are people storing I-9s with medical files. And this overall, it sounds kind of boring. I get it. But that's why I found this super interesting. Because if your employees' documents are all over the place, so whether that be, they could be in your Google Drive, they could be printed out and put in file cabinets, or maybe they submitted a form back to you via email and it never left your inbox. It's really, really easy to lose track of these, what's been signed for and what's not been signed for. There are also rules about what you have to keep and for how long. So, for example, I-9s, the forms submitted by the government, and that also recently changed, just to let you know, have to be stored separately from medical information or disciplinary records. So, the interesting but not fun part for you, if you don't have an HR software, is that there are so many things you have to consider when storing employee information, and this is on a legal level. So, what you have to think about when you're storing these documents is how long you retain hiring records. So, that could be someone's application or their resume, anything related to their hiring records, how long you have to maintain employee files. So, documents that come with the employee, how long you keep them while they're there, and then how long you keep them after you've terminated them. Sorry, not everyone's getting fired around here. If they leave, how long do you keep those records around for? There's different laws and regulations around electronic record keeping. And then there's laws around how much access that your team or yourself as leadership or in management, how much access can people have to those personnel files. So many state laws require that employers allow current or former employees to access the contents of their personnel file. So employers have to understand that the requirements of the law in your state where their employees work and define internally what access is permitted in states where there is no regulatory requirement. And so that's helpful information to know about for me, even while I'm trying to be an adult this year and file my taxes. It was really important to me that I was able to go back to previous employers and make sure that I could pull any of the old forms that I had with them and get access to those, even though I'm no longer with them. But that employer has to know how long to keep those records on hand, because that is a legal issue if they don't. The other legal aspects of it is they're looking into the security of your employment records. So they're looking how secure that information is, where it's kept. Is it in a cloud-based software? Is it secure from other employees for records that they shouldn't have access to? And then in terms of record retention, there's a ton of different federal and state laws that govern how long you're supposed to have those files on hand. Most employers will use a 7-year rule before purging any terminated files from a previous employee or employee that's resigned. But this change is based off of the type of document and the type of files that there are. So that's where it really matters. And that's something to me is such a major headache that I thought it was really interesting that they'd even had laws around this stuff. But the part that I think would make lives a lot easier is if you just have someone else to deal with that for you, because there's going to be different time frames, there's different regulations. It's such a headache to deal with. It's great, right? It's something that we all want access to, and it's something that makes sense, but it's not something that I want to memorize, right? So I want a software that'll take care of that for me, and I want a software that'll be able to handle that and keep me compliant without me even having to think about it. So the next one is HR mistake number 6, wage, hour, and overtime non-compliance. So with this, we're often seeing that overtime, meals and rest breaks, rounding of the minutes, all of that really does matter. We're often seeing that there's missed or unpaid overtime due to, kind of relates back to misclassifying employees. These are huge areas for mistake, and a common issue that we see is rounding time, like automatically rounding 7:58 a.m. to 8 o'clock a.m. In some states, that's absolutely not allowed. Other issues can include not tracking your meal or rest breaks, having employees work off the clock, not paying overtime at the correct rate. All of those things can be real legal issues if they're not tracked properly, if your employees haven't been classified properly, and if there's no written policy, then you have no defense either. So all of these mistakes in some way kind of relate to each other too, which is why a lot of this is super important. So with this mistake, it also relates back to your employee handbook, making sure that you have your meal and rest break policy outlined in your employee handbook, that employee has signed it. But even before that, having that discussion while you're hiring a new employee and saying, here's our policies. If you agree with them and you want to be a part of our team, setting that standard ahead of time, making sure that they know what the rules are and that they've signed off on them. But overall, you want to make sure that you're tracking them. Some of the times you don't have to have meal or rest breaks, but you want to make sure that you're documenting everything and that the employee, put that back onto the employee too. Make sure that the employee is logging this in the system. Put some of that on them, that they're taking the initiative to log these, to show that they have been taking those meals or rest breaks. And your best, and I'm kind of talked about this with clarity. That's kind of like the overall theme, just being really transparent about what those policies and procedures are within your practice, making sure that you have a system that tracks the time to the minute and flags any missed breaks or any time that someone has clocked in early or clocked in late. One cool thing with HR for Health, I don't think it's cool for me, but I will tell you that we have an ability to where an employee can only clock in at a designated location. So that's based off of IP addresses. We're not tracking you everywhere, but we can show from the location. So if you want to make sure that your employee can only clock in at the practice, and that's when they've started their work. So that means they can't clock in from Starbucks, or they can't clock in while they're still getting ready in the morning. HR for Health makes sure that they're clocking in at that location, and it only lets them clock in once they're at that location. I personally wouldn't love that because I would probably get dinged quite a few times. I'm working on my problem with being late, but I think it's really cool to have that feature, so that way you're transparent with your team. Your team is honest with you, right? So they're telling you when they're clocking in and that they're where they're supposed to be. And make sure that with this, you have written policies out, and goes back to the employee handbook, making sure that they signed it and that they agree to it. And having your employees edit their time on their timesheets, making sure that they're doing it and you're not going in and making those edits. If you do happen to put yourself in that position where you need to edit them, don't recommend it, but make sure that employee in writing is approving of that. But with HR for Health, we put it on the employees to edit those timesheets and to have the manager approve them, because it's just such a legal nightmare if the employer is doing something, and it can just come back to bite you if that employee decides to disagree with it later or says that I never said that or I never wrote that. Putting it back on the employee to manage that keeps you a lot safer in the long run. And so I know, I had to go here. Listen, it's not a sales pitch, okay? It doesn't have to be HR file. I'm not going to pressure you, but I do want your lives to be easier, because this stuff like really sucks if you don't know all of the rules and regulations. It does not have to be. If you are just feeling a little rebellious today and you're like, Taylor, I didn't sign on here today to hear all about HR for Health and how amazing it is. The solution overall, make sure you are using a digital platform, having software, HR software in place for payroll, for your employee handbooks, for performance reviews, for timekeeping. It just makes your life so much easier, and it's something that you don't have to deal with. It's one of those things that's an investment up front, and that you're going to put in your employee information. You're going to get used to it. It's going to be a little different if you're not used to using an HR software. But the solution to all of these things is just having someone else deal with it, right? Because even if you want to, let's say, in your perfect world, you're like, okay, I'm going to ask a employment law attorney to draft up my employee handbook. And I'm just going to get that out of the way, right? Because it sounded like from today's session that the employee handbook can solve a lot of problems. It is true. However, let's say you feel like you can go and Google questions later on classifying your employees, on overtime rules or sick leave policies in your state. The issue with that is it's far more time consuming for you to have to go and Google it, for you to have to write things up, for you to have to memorize them, all for later. Unfortunately, the government's going to change it at some point. Something is going to change, whether you like it or not. Sick leave policies are going to change. Federal laws are going to adjust. And as frustrating as that is, it's kind of a good thing that that happens, because employees, the more that we learn, the better we can protect employees. And I hate to break it to you, but if it's a lot, it means someone messed it up for the rest of us, right? Because some of it seems like common sense, but common sense isn't common. And so employment laws have come in to safeguard and protect employees. And that's constantly going to change as employees speak up about certain things. Maybe someone ruined it for the rest of us at work, and now we have to have a romance policy, right? It's easier to just have it all in one place and have it update on its own so you don't have to worry about it. And to be quite honest, even if it weren't compliance related, it's so exhausting having to learn what all of these things, what all of this means. I was getting a headache just looking at all of the laws that are involved when it comes to keeping employee records. You have to keep this for X amount of months, for X amount of years. It's exhausting, and it's really not that fun to learn about all the time. So if you have some place where you can keep all of it in one spot, it makes your life a lot easier. For one. Two, you put the blame there, right? Because if an employee decides to sign an employee handbook by hand, they didn't sign it at all, that's on you later on down the road. But if you have a software that shows they signed it, it's dated, it's been there, they can't erase it, they can't remove it, and you can't lose it because it's in a software as well, makes life so much easier in the long run just to put it all there and to have it dealt with. So I'm not going to give you my best sales pitch ever. I do think HR for Health is obviously the best because we're catered towards healthcare and dental practices. But I just want your lives to be easier, and you don't have to suffer if you're doing a lot of this stuff manually. It's just not fair to you to have to carry that. So just make sure with whatever you're doing, I want to preserve your sanity, and I want to help you get gray hairs a lot less. And I think if you offload the HR problems, you'll have to worry about covering them up a lot less often. So if you do feel like HR for Health is a really good solution for you, I think we're pretty great. You can scan this QR code to book time with our team. There's no pressure behind that. What I'll do after our session today is I will send out the recording to this, and I will include my slide deck that I had today. So you can review it at a later time. You don't have to book a call with us today. If you're exploring your options and looking into HR softwares, it's a really overwhelming process. There's like a million out there. But the difference with us is that we are catered towards healthcare and dental practices, to med spas, to vet clinics, to everything related to healthcare, where it's so much different than big corporate organizations. And also, it's just really nice to have a team that understands you and the questions that you're asking. And so that's why it matters to have an HR advising team that you can call and spill all of what's going on within your dental practice and have them understand, for one. And two, whatever you're going to tell them, I bet you they've heard it before. So you're not alone in anything that you're dealing with. And you have access to that team. So as we get more advanced in technology, a lot of this stuff is through chatbots and through AI. We have a core team that is going to answer the phone and their emails to you directly and be able to give you that tailored one-on-one support, which is really nice to have, because sometimes you're having a problem and you don't even know how to articulate that into a email or into Google, and however you're dealing with it. So having that HR support from a team that gets what you're dealing with, and someone that can tell you too, like, hey, I just talked to a practice owner that experienced the same exact thing, makes you feel a lot less alone in that process too, because you don't have to suffer in silence on this. So if you want to talk with us, you're more than welcome to. You can also respond to the emails that I've sent out about this webinar today, or you can respond to the one that I'm going to send out soon that'll have the copy of the presentation, and I'm going to have a link to the recording. And if there's any other documents or resources that you need, respond back and just ask for it. It doesn't ever hurt to ask. So I'm going to wait for like 2 seconds. I'm assuming there's no questions in here because I answered all of them. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe, maybe not. I don't see any in here. If you learned anything, please just don't use an employee handbook template. It's just not a good time for anyone to use a template. You have to have something specific towards your practice, and something that updates on its own, because the laws are constantly changing for sick leave, for PTO, for overtime, for minimum wage, for everything. It's constantly changing. And it's not all over the front page either. That's the crazy thing. It's like I have to do some digging to find out what these employment laws are and how they're changing. It is not going on the front page of the New York Times, which I get it. Sometimes it's not very fun to read about these things, but it's really hard to keep up with all of these changes. So having things that update on their own, and we also tell you that they're updating, that there's new laws within your state. It kind of is nice to know, too, that you're more aware of it. And it might be a really good dinner conversation with your friends if you're like, hey, this new sick leave policy in California, isn't that wild? Because we told you about it. You're going to see it pop up on the platform. So, with all of that, I hope that you really enjoyed today's session and I didn't bore you to bits and pieces. But if you have any questions, you can email us directly if you want to hear about our pricing, if you want to hear more about our software, if you want to tell us a really good HR joke, you can email us at hello@hrforhealth.com, or you can respond back to the email that I'll send out later today. But thank you all for giving me part of your time on this Thursday. And I really hope to hear from some of you soon, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.